At the dawn of the 1920s, America was still a decade away from the golden age of radio. St. Louisans at the time had limited listening options, but a group of local investors set out to change that. It was a powerful encounter destined to explore new methods of human communication, interaction, and exchange. It was KMOX Radio.
There are still a lot of radios in St. Louis that the dial has never moved from 1120.
There was certainly talk radio before 1960, but to commit the entire station to it really was a new adventure in radio.
There really is only one perception of KMOX, and that is that it is one of, if not the only, legendary station left.
The crackle of Christmas music signaled the official launch of KMOX Radio on Christmas Eve 1925. A local mayor hailed the station as a gift to America, surely sensing the importance of this opportunity. KMOX explored the boundaries of modern technology in 1947 with the completion of a new 50,000-watt transmission tower. The immense signal strength meant that on a pristine night, listeners in 44 states and parts of Canada and Mexico could tune their radios to KMOX.
And literally, I'd listen to KMOX in Mexico City. I'd listen to KMOX in Anchorage, Alaska. With a signal like this, it was so pervasive. It just, everybody everywhere was hearing it.
When television was introduced, radio listeners began to switch to the new medium for their news and entertainment. Radio stations turned their schedules almost entirely over to music. Around that same time, a young man named Robert Hyland took over the reins at KMOX. Hyland realized that television was his primary competition. During the late 50s, he began to formulate his plan for radio dominance. However, when his staff learned of the revolutionary concept for a talk radio program called At Your Service, the feedback was less than enthusiastic. Perhaps the St. Louis Globe Democrat's media critic best summarized the general reaction.
How would you respond if I told you a prominent St. Louis radio man has plans to uproot his weekday afternoon record shows and disc jockeys and broadcast instead a sort of catch-all talk program? He's out of his cotton-picking mind, was my first reaction.
For the first time, interviews with people of all positions and walks of life could take place, and listeners could call in to participate in the exchange. With the exception of Hyland, many people at the time didn't realize their encounters with talk radio could far surpass the effect of any soundbite or image on the screen.
I mean, I can't just pick up the phone and call the governor and carry on a conversation. But if he happened to be on the radio and they're taking calls, well, you got a shot. You got a chance of getting through.
Hyland described At Your Service as an all-information format designed to broaden and widen the scope and function of radio. Programming that is truly provocative, timely, and informative. The program will be a true newspaper of the air. Taking a massive risk, he threw away the station's entire record collection. The staff was going to give this talk radio concept their full effort, whether they liked it or not. Little did they know this show would explore a new territory in the area of information exchange. The extensive search for a host ended with Jack Buck, a young announcer who was best known for doing the play-by-play of Cardinal baseball games. On February 29, 1960, Buck sat down behind the microphone and made radio history.
5 minutes past the hour of 3 o'clock, and that will be the usual starting time for At Your Service, our brand new program which inaugurates today. We're very pleased to have with us on this first program His Honor Mayor Raymond R. Tucker of St. Louis. And he and I will be chatting for a while. You'll get a chance to ask him some questions a bit later on. The number to remember is Mission 75504.
After a mere 4 months on the air, the success of the new program caused the Globe Democrat to change its tune.
When you call up somebody, whether they're in New York, Los Angeles, Britain, and you say you're from KMOX, they will take your phone call.
This global recognition allowed KMOX to attract eminent Americans as guests, not the least of which was former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
Well, I'm wearing a Kennedy Johnson button because I am a Democrat and because I believe that Senator Kennedy will make the best president we could elect.
For some time, the St. Louis Cardinals were the baseball team of the South and the West. No other teams existed for those fans to follow. KMOX fulfilled the desire of these fans to hear about their favorite team because of the sheer power of its signal and the excellence of its broadcasters, the legendary Jack Buck, Harry Carey, and later, Mike Shannon. One of those broadcasters was Bob Costas.
So a station with kind of roster of stars that we had, Jack Buck and Dan Kelly and Bob Starr and people like that, the whole history of the station, Harry Carey, Joe Garagiola, that a station like that with the reach that it had, 50,000 watts, it wasn't just people in St. Louis, it was people all over the Midwest who listened to it.
In 1992, KMOX explored the boundaries of satellite technology by broadcasting a whirlwind tour of 5 European cities in 5 days, culminating in a first-ever broadcast from Red Square in Moscow. Engulfed in a crowd of over 300, host Bob Hardy acted as mediator while listeners in Moscow and St. Louis encountered the cultures of their former enemies.
I mean, when I was in the Senate, every year KMOX would have a trip to Washington, and they would do a great job. And I can remember they'd ask me to set up interviews with people, and I did. I think anybody who's in public life wants to sort of be on the right side of KMOX radio.
Radio personalities must be storytellers and understand the element of imagination that is an inherent part of radio. The nature of the outlet gives the perception that the host and listener are together in the same room. However, a one-way communication barrier still exists. The unique format that KMOX pioneered broke this barrier and allowed a true two-way exchange between both parties.
It may seem counterintuitive, but radio is more intimate than television. Even though television shows you more. You get to see as well as hear. But in radio you can only hear. And so the mind works a little more with radio. It's a little more active and less passive. And I think that because the listeners are more active at listening to radio than viewers are watching television, they get more involved in it.
In the early 1960s, the visionary Bob Hyland invented a new communications format for a changing nation. KMOX and talk radio made possible for the first time an exchange of information between those in power and their constituents. KMOX's broadcasts explored the boundaries of modern technology and allowed listeners to encounter cultures a globe away. Hundreds of stations across the world have emulated the KMOX model, yet KMOX, #1 longer than any other station in the country, continues to innovate.
The lasting legacy of KMOX is quality broadcasting by some of the greatest radio broadcasters in American history and a connection to the community that very few broadcast stations have ever been able to approach, let alone match.